All right. Is that working, Kenny? Cool. Apologize for the late start. I had a little bit of technical difficulties. I downloaded the wrong format because Macintosh hates Windows, and so I had to run home, and thankfully I could rectify that real quickly, and I don't live too far away. I was thankful for that as well. All right. So we are in our 16th class of Hebrews. I'm not going to spend too much time recapping. Hopefully you can recall a lot of what I say at the beginning, which is basically, hey, keep in mind, this is an argument that builds on everything, all the themes that we've discussed so far, things of that nature. What I will preface right now is we are going to touch on a verse, number 26 in particular, that is quite a bit, it's difficult. I'll just say that. It's very thorny. It's similar to what we talked about before in chapter 6, verses 4 through 6. The idea of it is impossible to renew those once again who've tasted the good things, et cetera, to renew them to repentance once again. This is a similar type of verse in a lot of ways, and I think that actually gives us a clue as what the author is hinting at here. Nonetheless, it is kind of a difficult passage to form, I think, a clear understanding of what is being said. All that to say, I have very few slides because there is so much information packed into that specific point of this letter, and I was really, really wanting audience participation. I was frankly going to ask a lot more questions at that point and just try and bring up some ideas that we can all maybe pass around and work through together regarding that. So, all that said, we're going to be picking up where we left off last time, which is verse 19 of chapter 10. So if you're following along in your Bibles, I'll read 19 and 20. Give me one moment. Okay, so we're going to, before we start, we're going to have there's three paragraphs in this passage that we're going to read, which is verse 19 through 39, hopefully. There's three paragraphs. They kind of have their own ideas in each one of them. The first paragraph, there's going to be three imperatives, things that we are to do, things that we should do, that the author is telling us. So pick up on those as we go through here. Verse 19 through 20. Therefore, brethren, since we have confidence to enter the holy place by the blood of Jesus, by a new and living way which he inaugurated for us through the veil, that is his flesh. I'm going to pause right there. The confidence, that's kind of an interesting word. Therefore, brethren, since we have confidence to enter the holy place, it's something that is denoting authorization, right? Previously, what confidence could you have in approaching the Lord, especially under the Levitical system, under the Old Testament? You had no confidence to do so because you weren't authorized. And now, as the author's going to expand upon in later verses, we have that authorization. If you refer to the previous passages we talked about, how the blood of Christ was shed in order to allow us to approach boldly. If you'll look in chapter 4 real quick, in verse 16, it's kind of a harken back to some previous ideas. That is the wrong verse. Oh, there it is. I see it now. Therefore, let us draw near with confidence. Remember that part too. Let us draw near. Therefore, let us draw near with confidence to the throne of grace, so that we may receive grace and find grace to help in time of need. Again, it's this idea that we now have confidence to be able to approach God, to access him. We can do so with boldness, even as it talks about in other places, and that is, again, on the authority of the blood that was shed by Christ. We also see this Greek word right here that I wanted to talk about. By a new and living way. That word new in Greek is prosphatos. And if you break that down, it's two parts. It's pro, meaning before, and what's the other one? Sphazo? I don't know if I'm saying that correctly, so forgive me. It means to slay. So we're playing on the sacrificial theme that we've seen so far, especially the slaughtering of animals. And so we see that Christ, again, gives us that authorization and thus gives us the confidence to approach God. How? Through his sacrifice. And there's something there with this freshly slain. That's how it was used with animals even at that time. This is a fresh sacrifice. You could even, it's a little gruesome to think of it, but it's like meat that had been freshly slaughtered as well when it was in the markets. That same type of word was provided. So now, taking that same idea, in verse 20, by a new and living way which he inaugurated for us through the veil that is his flesh. Again, it's kind of a gruesome idea, and I don't think it's not without reason for that. But is this Christ's flesh that opens the curtain? This is going to be a little bit nuanced, but I'm curious to see what you guys say. Is it Christ's flesh that opens this curtain? Is it Christ's flesh just a metaphor for the curtain? And when we're talking about the curtain, remember the holy places, how they're delineated. You have the holy place and the most holy place delineated by this curtain that the high priest could enter through once per year on the Day of Atonement. This is what we're talking about with that curtain. Now, maybe you've never stopped and thought about this for a second. Maybe it doesn't matter all that much anyway. Hey, the author's saying it, and it is what it is. I think it's interesting, though, because the author's moving from this spatial usage, right, and like talking about a space here, but now we're talking about the means. We're talking about the instrumental usage about Christ's flesh. The comparison, of course, is to the tabernacle and the entry into the holy place, and it's been referred to throughout this entire epistle. The tearing of Christ's own flesh for us creates the way through to God, as though a curtain was parted. And so one quote that I found interesting, it read, as the old covenant priest had to pass through the veil, the new covenant people go to God, enter his presence via the sacrificial death of Christ. There's a little bit of both here. Christ's flesh opens the curtain in a sense, but his own body is that curtain for us. He has torn it open and allowed us to enter into God through that. And there's a lot of meaning kind of embedded in that. Yeah, James.
He says best in John 3, which says, tear down, destroy this temple, and I'll raise it up in 3 days.
Yeah, and so James brings up in John 3 how Jesus refers to the temple, tear down this temple, and in 3 days it will be rebuilt. I'm paraphrasing. This is a poor paraphrase. But yeah, he's obviously referring not to the temple, the physical temple, but rather the temple of his own body as it elaborates. And so similar idea here. Any thoughts so far on that? I know it's just one point of many in this whole thing. Okay, let's read 21 and 22. I'm going to back up just a little bit. Therefore, brethren, since we have confidence to enter the holy place by the blood of Jesus, by a new and living way which he inaugurated for us through the veil, that is his flesh, and since we have a great high priest over the house of God, let us draw near with a sincere heart, in full assurance of faith, having our hearts sprinkled clean from an evil conscience and our bodies washed with pure water. So in verse 21, it's bringing together the idea of these previous things that we have, and now we're going to couple them with this confidence and the boldness with the great high priest, right? How is it that, let me back up. So we see our first imperative here, and that is to let us draw near. The author is telling us, right? Let us draw near. Not near to each other necessarily, but let us draw near to God. And how is it that we are able to do that? It's with a sincere heart and with full assurance of faith. Those are the things that allow us to draw near to God. Christ has opened the way, and now we can approach him with a sincere heart and full assurance of faith. Excuse me one moment. The sincerity has the sense of true or genuine. Pardon me. This text is really small. I apologize. Sincerity has the sense of true or genuine, while assurance has the meaning of complete confidence or certainty. So the Hebrew author laid out two objective grounds for our drawing near to God. The entrance is by the blood of Jesus and a great high priest over the house of God. Those are the objective grounds, right? In the sense of like they're not subject to us, right? So now the two subjective grounds are these, with a sincere heart and full assurance produced by faith. In other words, God has done his part so that we can be enabled to do ours. This idea of the two cleansings, how it talks about, refer to the work of God accomplished at our conversion. They also refer to the Old Testament ritual washings, if you'll remember how there's a laver and all these other things that the priests would wash themselves beforehand. They also, as well as the author's claim in chapter 9, verse 14, how much more will the blood of Christ, who through the eternal Spirit offered himself without blemish to God, purify our conscience from dead works to serve the living God. So again, the reason why I bring this up is because it's going to become an issue later on in the same chapter. The author is continually bringing in the Old Testament imagery, the Old Testament practices, and kind of reframing it through this lens in Jesus that we have now, through this new covenant lens. And so just keep that in mind as we go through. It's going to get a little weird, I promise. So let's get to verse 23. The second imperative pops up here. Let us hold fast the confession of our hope without wavering, for he who promised is faithful. So again, let us draw near, is our first one. And our second one is let us hold fast. This harkens back to, if you'll look at Hebrews 4 and 14, kind of that same idea. I think I actually read this before. Therefore, since we have a great high priest who has passed through the heavens, Jesus, the Son of God, let us hold fast our confession. Okay? Again, the author is continually bringing up these ideas, moving them forward in the argument. So why is it that we can hold fast? Why is it that we can hold fast to this confession? This is going to be expounded upon much more in chapter 11, the faith chapter, but it's because he who promised is faithful. This is what allows us to hold fast. Let me make it simpler. If you have no faith in something, should you hold fast to it? There's kind of no point, right? If you have faith in something, you would naturally want to hold fast to that. So why is it that you have faith in what God has promised? It's because of who he is. First, God is who he is. He is true and faithful, and thus he promises to us these same things, and we can in turn have faith in him and hold fast to what it is that he's promised. So any thoughts so far about what we've covered? Any questions or interjections? Okay. Let's keep going here. It's building here. The third imperative is going to pop up right here. And let us consider how to stimulate one another to love and good deeds, not forsaking our own assembling together, as is the habit of some, but encouraging one another all the more as you see the day drawing near. Okay. The third imperative. First one was let us draw near. Second is let us hold fast. Third is let us consider, to shorten it up, but let us consider how to stir up one another to love and good works. The primary motive here is love. It's a reflection of who God is. It's a reflection of what he's done for us. I don't want to step on anybody's toes, but in some ways you could say God has done good works to us through his love. In the same way, we express that. We have love, and those good works flow out from that. It's the same idea. We are to stir one another up to love and good works. Love being the primary motive, and the good works that come from that. Now, how does that mesh with the neglecting to assemble? I know we typically view that as like, well, this is a command, you got to be here on Sunday and meet and this and that. Fair point. I think that does apply. But I think there's something more that the author's getting at. And that's the idea of, look, I'm telling you, you need to stir one another up to love and good works. How is it that you do that? Well, you have a regular time to meet with each other. You even have other times that you don't regularly meet, but make that effort perhaps to meet. There becomes a cycle that's self-perpetuating. When you meet, you share that love. When you meet, you share that love, and from that come good works towards each other. From those same love and good works, you would want to meet again, would you not? If something was just fantastic and having a great time, and wouldn't you want to go back for more? Well, the good news is you can. You come back for more, and you experience more love, you experience more good works, you keep spurring each other on and on and on and on. I think that's maybe the more important point of what the author's getting at here with don't neglect that. Why? Because people, when they're by themselves, it's difficult. It's difficult to spur yourself on sometimes, especially when what the author's going to talk about later in this chapter, the things that they're going to suffer. So you need to meet in order to spur each other on, to share that love with each other, to experience those good works. It's a reflection of God, and it's a system that He has instilled in us to experience that same way. Does that make sense? Objections, comments, concerns? Robert?
A couple of things. One is, I love the thought that starts this, which is, let us consider. It doesn't tell us, here's what you do. No, you need to think about this and come up with ways that you can stimulate one another, ways that you can do it, ways that others can do it for you. All of that is encapsulated in that phrase, let us consider. It's something that should be on our minds consistently, of making it fruitful when we come together, of making sure there is an objective of stimulation of love and then good works, that encouragement and that demonstration of love, which echoes what Paul talks about in 1 Corinthians 14, of let all things, when we come together, let all things be done for edification. So it's really hitting on a lot of different ideas that are already talked about in the New Testament. And then the other thing that I always focus on is, I think sometimes we look at verse 25 as, well, we need to make sure we're sort of keeping our attendance up. But the word there is forsake, the assembly. There's an intentionality behind that word. If you could, if there's any more definition on that that you can give, I would love to hear it. But, the idea of forsaking something is you truly make a willful and conscious choice to go away from that thing. Not just, I happened to miss, or I was sick, or this. No, I am making a choice to forsake this thing. And it's also indicative of a habit as well, not a one-time thing.
So I wish I could repeat that for whoever watches the live stream, but I can't. So I appreciate that, Robert. Yeah, I agree with you on that. Any other thoughts or comments so far? Yeah, Mitch.
I just got to think tying all these narratives together because of Christ and the work that He did. He is our great high priest that we can draw near first with a sincere heart, full of faith. But then that allows us to hold fast the confession.
Yes.
And then if we didn't turn that outward toward, not just doesn't stay that way of just being God, then it's I need to consider how to stimulate others, not by failing to show up, but by encouragement. So that means also that when we show up and encourage.
Yes.
So and then what that does is allows you to draw near. When you stimulate others, it allows them to draw near. And it's all kind of a loop, right?
Yes.
By being encouraged, then you can draw near to God and hold fast, stimulate. So
Absolutely. Couldn't have said it better myself. I did, one thought I had in my mind as you were kind of patching those two ideas together. In some ways, it's a simple, how do I say it? Practical application of the first two greatest commandments, right? The first being love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength. And the second, love your neighbor as yourself, right? This is that application right here that we can see. And there's other ways, of course, but this is one for certain that exemplifies that. So anything else? Not, we're going to move on to the hard stuff here. All right, 15 minutes is not enough to unpack all of this. I'm going to tell you this right now. I think it would be unwise of me to firmly take a stance on how you, let me rephrase that. I can think what I want to think, as long as I can prove that to myself, so to speak, biblically. I think it would be unwise of me to tell you, you must think this, or else you're wrong, or whatever. So what I would like to do is, I'll kind of preface a little bit of this, and I'm going to read through the rest of the chapter, actually, because I think it is important in helping understand how to view this. And then from there, I will ask kind of a lot of questions, and I would really appreciate everybody chiming in so that we can come to a better understanding, if not a perfect understanding of what this is. I'm going to tell you this right now. I'm not going to be the arbiter of truth and say, nope, that's wrong, nope, that's right, that's the one that we need to focus on. Like, I am interested in having ideas and iron sharpening iron, as it were, about how we can view this. So without further ado, it's a difficult passage to unpack. You're going to run across some of the same questions that we did with Hebrews chapter 6, verses 4 through 6. If you'll recall, one of the main dilemmas with that passage was, who is this talking about? If you'll remember the three views I posited, you had the Arminian view, the Reform view, and then the loss of reward view. One of the questions was, who does this refer to? If you fall on the side of, well, this is talking about somebody who is not a believer. Okay. Then you're going to have to explain, well, what are they talking about right here? Is this describing a non-believer? Oh, this is talking about an apostate, like somebody who is apostatized. Okay, fine. What about these verses that seem to be indicating it's a believer? Oh, it's talking about a believer, but then it's talking about how they can lose it. Okay, fine. But then how do you rectify that with some of these eternal redemption, eternal salvation verses, right? We'll get into it more. Similar questions here. What is it that they have done, the person that it's referring to? What is it that they have done? And what is the consequence of the thing or things that they have done? Okay? I'm going to preface it with that, and then I'm going to start reading 26 through 39. For if we go on sinning willfully after receiving the knowledge of the truth, there no longer remains a sacrifice for sins, but a terrifying expectation of judgment and the fury of a fire which will consume the adversaries. Anyone who has set aside the law of Moses dies without mercy on the testimony of 2 or 3 witnesses. How much severer punishment do you think he will deserve who has trampled underfoot the Son of God and has regarded as unclean the blood of the covenant by which he was sanctified and has insulted the Spirit of grace? For we know him who said, "Vengeance is mine, I will repay." And again, the Lord will judge his people. It is a terrifying thing to fall into the hands of the living God. But remember the former days when, after being enlightened, you endured a great conflict of sufferings, partly by being made a public spectacle through reproaches and tribulations, and partly by becoming sharers with those who were so treated. For you showed sympathy to the prisoners and accepted joyfully the seizure of your property, knowing that you have for yourselves a better possession and a lasting one. Therefore do not throw away your confidence, which has a great reward, for you have need of endurance, so that when you have done the will of God, you may receive what was promised. For yet in a very little while, he who is coming will come and will not delay. But my righteous one shall live by faith, and if he shrinks back, my soul has no pleasure in him. But we are not of those who shrink back to destruction, but of those who have faith to the preserving of the soul. Okay. If your Bible kind of highlights or does something different with the font when you're reading through this passage to indicate, hey, this is an Old Testament passage, take a look at how many times the Old Testament is referred to just in that passage. I think there's 5. I think there's 5 different Old Testament references. So just if you only wanted to look at those verses, 26 through 39, The Old Testament is definitely in view. It's definitely a background for the understanding. But as we know, the author is not focusing just on this. They focused on so much more material and referenced the Old Testament basically the entire time in various ways. The Old Testament is definitely a background for understanding how to interpret this. Allusions to other statements are made elsewhere in the epistle. For instance, when we look at 10:26, for if we go on sinning willfully after receiving the knowledge of the truth, there no longer remains a sacrifice for sins. Compare that with 10:18. Now, where there is forgiveness of these things, there is no longer any offering for sin. That's kind of curious wording. And I don't think it's unintentional. As we've seen many times, the author does a lot of these things with phrases, words, and how they kind of piece together the argument. Another curious thing that I'd like to point out is the word eternal is not used in this passage, but it is elsewhere in the epistle. 3, just to name a few. I think there's 6 in total. 3 we've covered so far. One is in 5:9, which talks about eternal salvation. 9:12 talks about eternal redemption, I believe. And 6:2 talks about eternal judgment. But it does so in this neutral kind of way, where it talks about we need to move on from the elementary works, from the baptism from the dead, baptism and ritual washings and laying on of the hands, and eternal judgment. It did not seem to me, at least, like you will be eternally judged, whoever's reading this. It's more of just this concept of, hey, there is an eternal judgment. It wasn't necessarily being cast upon anybody. So I wanted to point that out. These are some of the questions I wanted to cover. But the obvious one is, what do you think about verse 26? For if we go on sinning willfully after receiving the knowledge of the truth, there no longer remains a sacrifice for sins. What do you think about that?
The idea of living in sin. Like
Okay.
intentionally disregarding something and saying, nah, I'm going to do this.
Okay? Living intentionally in sin. Let me back up for my own sake here. This is a scary verse. I'll just be honest. Why? I don't know about y'all. I will dime myself out on this. I have intentionally sinned before. I have. Lied when I knew I shouldn't have. Lusted when I knew better. Talked rudely, meanly, hatefully, whatever you want to call it, to somebody. Like, I knew better. Is it every day all the time? No. Has it been more than once? Yeah, it has. I would like for you to maybe examine yourselves and ask yourself the same question. Have you intentionally sinned after having come to the knowledge of the truth? I would venture to say there's more than one of you like me who has done that. So then I have to now ask myself, what am I doing here then? If it's just game over for me, is that what this means? It'd be real easy for me to assuage my own conscience and no, that's not what it means because I want it to mean something different, right? But that's a question that I've had to wrestle with. Is it just game over for me? Go ahead, Scott.
Well, I mean, we're going off of a translation here, but it
Sure.
does say sin aim. It doesn't say sin.
Okay, and they're definitely, yeah. So Scott points out the idea of certain translations will choose different words. I don't want to say tweak or modify. It's nobody's playing games here, I don't think, as much as trying to come up with the best translation that they can. And so that is a possibility, right? Is this the exact understanding of it? But I'll camp on it right here. If you intentionally sin, does that mean it's over? Nita.
We're all human, we're all gonna make mistakes. We get angry, we get sad. We're going to make mistakes, but I think the main idea is you know you made a mistake. You
Okay. I hope so too. I mean, if that's all I have to go on, I just hope so. But is there something else there, Mitch?
Just looking at the verse, what stands out to me is if we go on. We go on means it's just a continuation, ongoing, sinning willfully.
Okay.
That's something to take into consideration. That's there for a reason.
Okay.
If we sin willfully, then we're threats to damnation. It doesn't say that. If we go on sinning willfully, so I mean, that's something to consider, I think, too.
Sure.
Is it a one-time thing, or is it just a continual state? It seems consistent.
So Mitch points out the idea of going on this continual lifestyle of willfully sinning. Is that what's being referred to here? I think it's certainly worth weighing that out, but I have a question about that. Yeah, Robert.
And I tend to think there's a lot of relationship here with what we talked about in chapter 6, which is the emphasis is on the sacrifice.
Mhm.
When you look at the sentence in verse 26, the emphasis is on there is no more sacrifice. If we back up to chapter 9, as well as some of the previous thoughts in this chapter, it emphasizes that Christ died once for all. When we accept Christ's invitation to become Christians, when we accept that cleansing of sins, there is no way to then go get baptized again and wash it all away. You don't get to partake in the sacrifice of Christ twice. So when those sins accumulate after the initial cleansing, I think simply put what the Hebrew author is trying to say, outside of the grace that lies with God that we have, according to Ephesians 2 and a few other places in the New Testament, that still exists after our baptism, you can't go back. You don't get to make a mistake and say, oh man, I've got all these sins, I'm going to go get baptized again, and I'll just do the sacrifice again, almost like what the Jews would do, which is, oh, I'll just sacrifice another bull this year. And I think simply put, the Hebrew author is trying to make a contrast of, look, you don't get to go back. There is one sacrifice, and then once it's done from there, you need to deal with these sins. You don't just get to wash them all away in mass, carte blanche.
Yeah. I wish I could summarize that for everybody who's listening to the live stream. I appreciate your point about the idea of not being able to be baptized a second time, if you will, to like participate in that sacrifice or that offering. I would agree with that point, and of course, keeping in mind chapter 6 and chapter 9, I think that's a big point. I saw two hands. Justin?
One of the thoughts that comes to mind that I think is healthy for us all to consider is when we're new Christians, or sometimes we can stay immature in our faith, and you can start to perceive like the point of becoming a Christian as just forgiveness, and if that's where you stop, and you don't grow in your faith in love for God and a desire to be obedient to Him because you love Him, and then you can start to cheapen the sacrifice of Jesus as if the point of becoming a Christian is just forgiveness. And that comes to mind in light of a verse like this. And not James, 1 John addresses kind of both sides of that.
I appreciate that thought because I think it also touches on what the author said earlier about the need to move on to maturity and how that was a big point. Big point was moving on to maturity. And so you bring up the idea of being perhaps stagnant in this idea of I am forgiven and that's good enough, when instead, no, being forgiven is the first step, and then pressing on to maturity is the goal, if you will. Did I see another hand, or did I imagine? Yeah, James.
All right. I think one interesting correlation here, but if we go on to St. Wilson, and then I was thinking about Ezekiel 18 when, the perspective here that God has about how people sin and their actions. If we look at chapter 18, verses 21, but if the wicked man turns from all his sins which he's committed, and observes all my statutes, and practices justice and righteousness, he shall surely live, he shall not die. So I love that word practices. It's something that you're actively striving to do. When, or in this particular case, not do, in this case, not sin. So I think it could be, in this particular case of Hebrews, this person is not practicing justice or righteousness.
Okay, so you're keying on Old Testament, Ezekiel 18, how the person is practicing lawlessness as opposed to perhaps a singular time. Is that fair to say? Okay, yeah, and sort of coupling that with this Hebrew passage. How about this? Some like kind of simple ones here. Was Christ's sacrifice, I apologize. Oh, yeah.
My translation has the word, or if we go on some deliberate.
Yeah.
Which I feel like, if you're looking at the word deliberate, to me that reminds me of like you're really thinking about it. It's not the same as the example maybe that you gave where you're saying like, well, I've lied and I knew it was a lie, right? You may lie in the moment, like, and make that decision very quickly.
Mm.
Like someone could ask you, like, how does my hair look? And you're like, it looks great, and you don't love it, right? That's not great for you to do, but you weren't like calculating that out. And so I think, to me, it comes down to like, was this like a calculated thing? Is this something that you're making a habit? Is it like something that you're really putting that thought into before you're doing it?
Mm-hmm.
And then if you're continually putting that thought into making deliberate sin, then that's a problem.
Okay. And so Chelsea keys on another difference in translation using the word deliberate, and she expounded upon like making a calculated judgment and motive to do so, and then acting upon that. And while I appreciate you lending that grace, like, well, you probably didn't do that, I'm going to tell you right now, I definitely did. And so that throw me right back in the boat here. Let me throw out some easy ones real fast. Was Christ's sacrifice once for all? The Hebrew author talks about that extensively and has repeatedly said so. Did Christ's sacrifice make perfect his followers, or perfect them, if you want to use the verb form? I'm getting some shaking heads, and okay, so let's look at 10:14. For by one offering he has perfected for all time those who are sanctified. Now, if you want to take the Reform view, well, yeah, that's not you. You're not sanctified, so you get in the apostasy camp, the reprobate camp. There you go. Okay, fine. I don't know that people get to make that call, though. And it would also say, well, then, if you think I'm a reprobate, then this is not talking about believers. You have to make that judgment too, like all these passages, when it clearly is talking about somebody who believes. So, again, I would maybe point that out. For by one offering he has perfected for all time those who are sanctified. Is the judgment spoken of in this passage, 26 through 39? Is the judgment spoken of something other than loss of salvation? Maybe an easier way of saying that, is the judgment spoken about actually loss of salvation?
Yes.
Can Christians be judged just like other non-Christians? I think the Bible's pretty clear. They will be judged. The outcome is going to be different. And that's going to be on the basis of the blood of Christ. 1 Corinthians 3:15, Paul talks about how the Christian is going to be judged. He's going to stand before God at the throne, and the works are going to be on display, and they're going to pass through fire, a judgment. And then what comes from that is essentially it's going to hold up or it's not. That is a judgment of sorts for the Christian. If apostasy is in view, how can God refer to a righteous one in verse 38? But my righteous one shall live by faith, and if he shrinks back, my soul has no pleasure in him. How can God refer to a righteous one as shrinking back? How does that mesh with all of this? Unfortunately, we are out of time. And so I will probably revisit this next class and allow you guys to dwell on this. Do your own research, please. Please, please, please do your own research. Don't take my word for it. Any other concluding thoughts or comments, questions? Randy, I keep seeing you throw your flipper out now. Yeah.
I'm thinking about all these things that we could know about the tabernacle and its workings. And I don't know that a Gentile would really tune into that very well. And I'm not saying it's not good for us to understand it, let's understand that, but the reality is if we're going to be able to understand all that, if there's ever a hope that we might grasp all these principles, it will be because of the death of Jesus and what that what that did for us. So I think that's why he keeps pointing them toward that fact, the blood of Christ.
Mhm.
I'm just thinking that maybe that's the way we come to make more sense of the tabernacle, for instance.
Yeah, I would agree. It's probably the best place to end that. So thank you all for your participation.